Wine held the gun in her hands and focused on the target. Jungkook smiled, seeing his wife trying a new thing. Jungkook was the mafia king and always wanted to teach her particular skills because he knew he would not able to save her all the time. She needed to learn self-defense as is enemies all over the country, and he cannot take any risk over her safety. She took aim again, her finger pulling the trigger. A bullet flew out and tripped the price of the paper target. She didn't move her head away from it though, continuing to keep her eyes glued at the target. Junko watched her every moment with adoration. He loved everything about her. Her beautiful face, her brown long hair falling down her back, and her long finger that held onto the pistol tightly. He loved watching her do what she is best at. He teased her, knowing that it would piss her off. She snapped. He chuckled softly, coming towards her. He wrapped his arm around her waist and pulled her close to him. He rested his chin top of her head and looked at the paper target. She asked, looking up at him. It was true, he trained her so much, but she never seemed very interested in learning anything. He replied, kissing her forehead. He cut her off and kissed her passionately. His hands went underneath her skirt, feeling her skin under his fingertips. He pushed her against the wooden frame of the door and kept them separate inside their bedroom. Vine opened her eyes. She was breathing heavily, seeing Jungkook's enemy pointed a gun at him. She was far away from him, and the scene in front of her terrified her. She looked at Jungkook with teary eyes. He sat there with a bloody nose and one arm covered in blood. He was tired, but he smiled at her. She ran toward Jungkook but was stopped by Kang. He threatened, he pressed gun harder into his temple and looked at her with the pure hate in his eyes. She asked Kang. The tears had dried on her cheeks, replaced with fear. He smirked and grabbed Jungkook's hair, making him yelp in pain. He pulled his head forward and pressed the gun on his neck. She screamed while she tried to come close to Jungkook, but he was kept pulling his hair harder and tighter. She felt helpless, like there was no way for her to help Jungkook. She kneeled down at him and begged for Jungkook. The man behind him smirked as he saw how broken she looked. He tightened the grips on Jungkook's hair and pressed the gun harder on his neck. He laughed. His eyes were growing red, just like those monsters who never show mercy. She paled, her voice cracked. Jungkook looked up at her, shaking his head at her. Her eyes landed on a gun which was laying on the floor a little bit away from her. She looked at Jungkook, who nodded his head, making her sure for her move. He said, coughing hard and whining in pain. Kang let go of Jungkook's hair and he slumped down on the ground. Wyan took the gun and pointed at Kang before he could do anything. She shot him in the center of his head. He fell backward and landing on the ground. She stood there frozen at her spot, tears falling from her eyes. She didn't expect that to happen. She looked at Jungkook and walked towards him. Tears fell down her face once again as she realized what had happened. She kneeled next to Jungkook and started caressing his cheek with her hand. Vine smiled at her 5 years old daughter and nodded her head. Sol smiled brightly before hugging her mother. They stared together for a few seconds before Sol pulled away and looked at her. Jungkook joked. Sol giggled while Vian rolled her eyes and smacked him on his head, making him hiss. Sol giggled again and went to bed after saying goodnight to Jungkook and Vian. Jungkook and Vian lay together staring at the ceiling, not moving an inch or blinking. It was only 11 p.m. Jungkook thought maybe she would fall asleep right then. When he turned to lie on his side and faced Vian, Vian was awake. She spoke, her tone full of emotion. Jungkook understood what was going through her mind. He chuckled sadly and moved closer to her. Jungkook placed a soft kiss on her lips before continuing. He cupped Vian's face and kissed her gently again. Vian melted into his touch, smiling against his lips as she closed her eyes. Jungkook leaned in and kissed her deeper, but before he could continue, a sudden knock on the door made him stop. He whined but opened the door for his daughter. Vian looked at Sol and chuckled at how cute she was wearing pajamas. He teased her, causing her to giggle happily. He hugged her, making her laugh more. Vian opened her arms, indicating Seoul to come to her. Seoul climbed on the bed and laid down between them. Hugging her mommy tightly, Jungkook looked at Vian lovingly, his eyes swelling with happiness. He placed a soft kiss on Vian's head and wrapped his arm around Seoul. She pouted. Jungkook laughed softly and agreed. He crawled in between Sol and Vian, pulling them in his embers.